Today, we're joined by Rye Barcott. He's a Marine Corps veteran, author, and co-founder of With Honor, an organization working to bring more vets and servant leaders into public office. Rye's career has taken him from leading Marines in combat to building a hospital in Nairobi, and now working with members of Congress at a time when bipartisanship itself can feel like an act of courage. His new book asks a deceptively simple question. What does courage actually look like in public life? And I'm not talking about the Hollywood version of courage, not the campaign trail version, but the harder kind. The moral courage to work with people who disagree with you, to take risks for the common good, to put country above party, and to keep serving when the incentives all point in the opposite direction. And that question matters far beyond politics. Because whether we are talking about the defense industrial base, biotechnology, shipbuilding, national service, or the future of democracy, the through line is the same. Institutions do not build themselves. People build them. And that requires trust, service, sacrifice, and leaders willing to do the hard, often unpopular work of governing. In this conversation, Rye and I talk about Stoicism, Marcus Aurelius, the legacy of military service, what happens behind the scenes in Congress when the cameras are off, why bipartisan legislation is often the most durable, and why right now, in this special moment, at America's 250th anniversary, this should be a moment not just of celebration, but of recommitment. At a time when the country can feel divided, Rye's message is a powerful one. Courage can still save us, but only if we recognize it, practice it, and demand it from our leaders and from ourselves. Let's get to it. Rye, thanks for joining us. You went from leading Marines in combat to building a hospital in Nairobi to fighting polarization in Washington. Which one was the most challenging?
Yeah, thanks, Kit. Great to be on your podcast here. And yeah, I just finished this book reflecting on the fight against polarization in DC by working with vets across party lines. And that is a very different type of challenge than leading Marines and being led by Marines at a time of conflict, or frankly, building a nonprofit organization, an NGO that actually turns 25 now in the informal settlements in Nairobi, Kenya, where about 25 different slum communities. Slum is the term that residents use for these conditions of really abject poverty. But the common through line of all three of those is really trust and building trust across demographics and ethnic groups and different beliefs, and being rooted in something that is common, a common value set. And at the core of it, what that is all embodied by is a service mentality, that in each of these different lines of work, whether it's humanitarian, military service, or the unforgiving arena of today's modern politics, working with people that are aiming to be what came out of Stoicism as the ideal of the servant leader. That, listen, we're all self-interested human beings, but we make each other better and we become better as individuals if we are focused on serving causes that are larger than ourselves. And the Stoics refer to this as the common good. Common good can be many things. It can be your family, it can be your friends, it can be your community, it can be your country, but it is not yourself. and that's really what I've defined as the definition of, or that's what I present as the definition of courage, that it's taking risks in the service of something larger than yourself, particularly the common good, in a conscious way, and with something that's at risk and at cost. So your question, going back to what was the most difficult of the three, what I would say is that working in modern politics and policy, and a lot of our focus is on policy. I'm sure we'll talk more about that, and getting things done across party lines at a time when it's tough to do that involves many trade-offs that embody moral courage, risks to your reputation, to your friendships, to your integrity, sometimes even as deep, some people feel, as your soul. choices of conscience to do what you believe is the right thing. And so I examined that within this book, and it's certainly been part of my learning journey over the last 9 years of building this organization with honor.
Marcus Aurelius wrote about that 2,000 years ago. Anything that jumps out to you as still being particularly relevant?
Yeah, I mentioned Marcus in the prologue, and his book Meditations, which is this incredible historical document that he wrote for himself while in battle for almost 10 years as the Holy Roman Emperor. That book was recommended by General Jim Mattis, one of our legendary military commanders during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, later Secretary of Defense, of course. And he carried a copy of Meditations with him to Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm thrilled that he's done a little blur or a review. It's coming out in Proceedings, a review of my book. It's a high honor. I read Meditations because of him, and I've revisited it as well many, many times. And what Marcus Aurelius does is he defines the common good, similar to the way that I just mentioned it, but he also gives a framework for this notion of a servant leader. And he, of course, embodied that, taking many risks in the service of those that he was serving, the citizens of Rome at that time. So a lot of this thinking comes out of Stoicism. I have a photograph of a famous painting behind me here. It's one of my favorite pieces of art, and what it is it's a depiction of the death of Socrates, and Socrates, of course, died. He chose to not relinquish his views in the world's first really known democracy, Athenian democracy. He was convicted of impiety and corruption of the youth and sentenced to death. But he was told that he could renounce his views. And instead of renouncing his views, he decided to take the ultimate sacrifice, if you will, and drank this cup of hemlock. So this is an amazing depiction of it. And Plato was, of course, there. And then Plato wrote Phaedo based on it. So why is that important? As I write about in the prologue that sort of sets the stage for the book, that was I think history's major initial example of the fusion of both moral courage and physical courage. It was obviously physical courage because he was accepting death, but he was also standing for what he believed in and his principle. So that's a little bit of the way that Stoicism informs the overall view of courage. And what I've tried to do is say, okay, this is what courage is. This is not a philosophical book, but I'll give you a framework in the prologue and then go into these 10 examples, 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, something that's very rare to see these days, but an even balance of both, and showing moments of both the genesis of courage, where that came from, their initial decision to serve either in the military or in one case the FBI, and then carrying that service mentality forward and taking risks in the service of others throughout their career in public office.
And your organization with honor helps get veterans and folks that have served our nation elected to offices around the country, to include, Congress. From your perspective, from where you sit in your experiences leading an organization like with honor, which advocates for that principled leadership and courage and cross-partisan cooperation, what do you see behind the scenes when it comes to putting courage and bipartisanship forward on issues that are really important to the nation, things like national security, defense, where we need elected leaders, not just in the United States, but in democracies around the world, to come together and put aside partisan differences to unite on issues of national importance?
Yeah, I think that most Americans want to see more courage, and they view that there is an absence of it in public life, but it still does exist. And this book highlights 10 examples. They're all 10 examples from more than 50 veterans that we work with in Congress, in the House and Senate. Those are aligned in a caucus called the For Country Caucus, FOR Country Caucus, led currently by Representative Jake Ellzey of Texas and Representative Don Davis of North Carolina, Republican and Democrat, both of whom served in both the Air Force and the Navy. And that caucus has about 38 members in the House, and then there's an affiliation of a dozen senators. There's a lot that, most of what we read about, of course, is the division and the conflict, and that's a natural human instinct. That's what attracts attention. But there is enormous amounts of work that happens behind the scenes with people that are fundamentally there in and elected in order to serve and actually get things done. And there's a core group of that. It's very important that maintain that stay together. And that's one of our focuses as an organization, is maintaining that trust even in bitterly divided times. It results in a tremendous amount of work. I mean, each year for the last 3 or 4 years, this group of veterans has passed over 50 laws into the National Defense Authorization Act. I was just at the bio conference yesterday that's led by one of our advisory board members, a Navy veteran named John Crowley. And this is a conference with over 20,000 people focused on our biotechnology industry, which of course is national security. A competitive innovation economy is part of our national security, let alone all the threats that are arising in this space. And so one of the things that we've done as an organization, in which I highlight some in the chapter about Senator Todd Young, is that we helped establish the National Security Commission on Biotechnology that for the last 3 years has identified laws to pass to help improve our nation's perspective on where biotechnology is going, and to defend against the threats that are emerging in this rapidly developing space. And by the way, that's resulted in almost 26 laws that have gotten passed on a purely bipartisan basis. So that is a critical part, not only to our work, but also a point of this book, which is that, as silly as it sounds, these days, just being bipartisan, meeting with somebody from the other side, can require courage, because it's often weaponized. But it is so important. And I think it's both important in public life as well as in our private life. If you think about, your family members that maybe have a different viewpoint than you do, or, the friend that you've defriended on Facebook because of their, point of view, where we are often captive to the algorithms that are, profiting from our attention and dividing our attention.
I love that mention of the National Commission that's addressing some of these emerging biotechnology issues. We recently had on Mac McKnight, who I believe you may know, CEO of Perimeter Bio, and he was also a Marine, and I think about leaders like you, leaders like him, vets across the nation that have served and are now in industry, helping bridge that gap, not only from a partisanship perspective, but from the gap between policymakers, legislators, and industry. And as we publish this episode, as the United States celebrates our 250th anniversary, I think it's important to think about what's coming next. What's going to happen next? There are tremendous challenges across the country, not only on the policy side, but as you mentioned, on the innovation side. So we always think about supporting the warfighter throughout all of that. That's a major cross line. And so where you sit, what does it really take? Industrial capacity, acquisition, innovation, taking care of people. Where is the gap the widest that you think courage can help folks address, not only on the Hill, but across industry?
Listen, I really think the core of it is disaggregated from any particular need of the United States or particular policy area. There are many massive ones, right? From revitalizing our defense industrial base to reducing our absurd and spiraling national debt, which is, of course, a national security issue that Admiral Mike Mullen first started speaking about while he was chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff. He's on our advisory board, but it is way out of control. But it all starts with, frankly, being able to still govern ourselves and fix our internal divisions. And that there's a technology component to that, obviously, with the way that our algorithms and the information environment exists. And I highlight that some in the chapter on Dan Crenshaw in particular, who is one of the few members that has really built a national following while also attempting to, not just attempting, but getting things done on a governance basis, and eventually pays the price for it, loses his primary race. So there's a technological piece to it, but there's also a cultural piece to it, and there's a leadership piece to it. And we need to celebrate more examples of individuals that can cross this divide, have the courage to do so, and stay focused on passing legislation that matters, whether that's, Senator Todd Young on the CHIPS bill, or Todd Young partnering with Mark Kelly, who's also profiled in the book, on the ships acts to revitalize our ship making. Many different examples throughout that are often not catching headlines, but incredibly important for the country. So I think it starts there, and that's one of my hopes with this book, is that I highlight that and give folks a way to celebrate those that are stepping up.
It's a great point on ship industrial base. We in the United States don't have the shipbuilding capacity that we've had for centuries. We just don't have it right now, period. So bringing back some of that capacity, bringing back and protecting emerging technologies like bio, all of that is a great example of where bipartisanship can come together and create policy and national security changes that really matter. But where do you think Congress...
And Kit, by the way, if I could just jump in on that, and are also durable, right? I mean, there is, I think many people feel this sort of temptation to say, oh, well, we just need to pummel the other side into submission, gain power, and then jam through our legislation. The problem is that it's very rarely sticks, right? You just get this sort of seesaw back and forth. And so the true durable legislation is bipartisan. Like, we have to seek that out, and it takes effort to do that. And frankly, it takes courage, because oftentimes those same individuals are criticized for, collaborating with the other side, which is cast in terms of being the enemy. You're the enemy because you're collaborating with somebody that's from a different stripe. Sorry, I cut you off though with where you were going.
It's all good. Where do you think Congress needs to act? Right. So we've got all of these challenges, and there is bipartisan support for a number of these issues. But where do you think Congress has the ability to act for the next few months going into a large election? But certainly on the other side of that as well, these large pieces of bipartisan legislation take a long time. So maybe not even this year, but over the next year or two, where do you see those next key bipartisan moments coming together?
Well, in the immediate future for this year, it is true in election cycles, there's less that gets done. But one thing that God willing will continue to get done, and has a tradition of more than 60 years, one of the only bills that does, is the National Defense Authorization Act. So we work very closely with the two ranking members who are bipartisan and are extraordinary individuals on the Senate side, Roger Wicker and Jack Reed. I was actually once an intern in like the 1990s when I grew up for then Congressman Jack Reed, great individual, and Senator Wicker has been a champion for our organization in the Senate arm. Don't take that for granted. I mean, Adam Smith and Mike Rogers not long ago made that point. They're the two the chair and the ranking member, Democrat and Republican on the House side, and just said, listen, guys, a lot of people just assume that this will get done, but every year it gets harder. Every year it gets harder, and it needs to be defended. And frankly, the biggest complication to this is members of Congress who are show horses, not workhorses, and use every opportunity when there's a bill that's coming up to throw in their culture war issue. There's another one that's coming up tomorrow to defund the International Republican Institute, which does enormous work around the country alongside the National Democratic Institute. And everybody knows that it's not going to pass, but a bunch of people are going to take a vote for convenience because it's good for them politically to be seen as, beating up on globalism. When in fact, these organizations, which were established under President Ronald Reagan, are defending our national interests across the country, across the world against authoritarian adversaries that are every day attacking us, every day, every moment. And it's not just attacking our government, they're attacking private individuals. Anyways, that's, I think in the short term, hey, let's stay focused on our national security. This is a critical time. We have an increase in our defense spending that's been proposed. And I think, on the whole, we obviously need to be defending into this infrastructure and our emerging challenges that are occurring. Longer term, beyond this cycle, I think about two areas in particular. I mentioned one earlier. The national debt is unsustainable. And listen, if we go back, we were talking about antiquity earlier. If you go back across, history of hegemonic, countries, many ended up becoming essentially over leveraged. They overspent their resources. Obviously, that's the case of the Roman Empire in particular, as Edward Gibbon and others. But we're at historically high levels. We've got to address it. It's easy for politicians to just say, spend, but you can't spend your way out of these problems. And then the second area that I think is essential and something that we've worked on for many years, and that my co-founder, the late David Gergen, really gave us our North Star on, is national service and increasing the opportunities for particularly young Americans to serve the common good, whether that's in military uniform or in civilian capacity. It's a striking thing that less than 1% of Americans serve in the military, less than 2% of Americans serve in military or federal service opportunities. There are other opportunities to serve, such as going into professions like nursing and first responders, police, teachers. But it's an increasingly smaller number of younger Americans in particular that are having the great opportunity to serve. And what service does is it imbues you with the attributes of being a better citizen and frankly being a better leader, because you work with people that have different viewpoints on missions that are challenging and figure out how to get things done. So I think there's a unique opportunity now, in particular, because of the displacements in jobs that we've seen with some of the rapid advancements in AI, especially for younger people. I think there's a hunger, a longing for a sense of purpose. We obviously also have a mental health crisis in the United States. So one of my real goals with this book, which I principally wrote with students in mind, is to call for new opportunities and more service opportunities for Americans. And I think there could be a real moment here. It is an issue that has broad bipartisan support. It's one of those few, 80-20 issues, this idea of voluntary national service and getting Americans to be able to spend at least a year of their lives in the service of the country or their community.
Going back to bipartisanship, I always think about when I served on the Hill, it was very interesting to see those behind the scenes moments where there was no cameras, there were no reporters, there were no journalists in the room. It was just members trying to work together to get stuff done. And we don't see that publicly very often. We don't see the chairman and the ranking member of a powerful committee, gleefully holding hands, talking about bipartisanship on Fox News very frequently, if ever, right? And so I think about those moments because it's so important for the public, not just in the United States, but for democracies around the world to understand and have some insights into what happens behind the scenes when there's no engineering of a media environment. There's no manipulation of a media environment. You've spent a long time on the Hill. You've spent a long time working with members of Congress on both sides of the aisle. Are there any specific moments that jump out to you that were most memorable where you saw people coming together, focusing on what matters the most? It could be, it doesn't have to be legislation, but anything jump out?
Yeah, I'll give you one from the book. My friend Seth Moulton, who's the member of the 10 that I know the most because we were in the basic school together. He taught me about a different vantage point of courage because he had the guts as a public official to say, "Hey, listen, I've struggled with post-traumatic stress, and this is a topic that we need to be talking more about. That is part of the way that you address a mental health challenge is you recognize that it is actually a problem." And so one of the first measures that we took as an organization almost 8 years ago was helping Seth enact and then grow the footprint of what became the National Suicide Hotline, the 988 number. He partnered with a Republican veteran to initiate that bill. And it is in place, and it's made a tremendous difference across the country. There's an excerpt in the chapter where I interviewed with my former commander, General David Berger. General Berger and I served in Fallujah together when he was a colonel. And General Berger told me that when he heard about this legislation, he called up Seth and he said, thank you for doing this. It takes guts to be able to say that you've had a problem. I know a little bit about this myself, and what can I do to help? And so Seth asked General Berger, who was then Commandant of the Marine Corps, to spread the word. And within a week, General Berger had sent what's called an ALMAR, an all-Marine message to every Marine and every commander across the world, saying that 988 is a resource, and every Marine needs to know that it's a resource and that their commandant endorses it.
Powerful. When you're thinking about America at 250 years we've been around. It's a long time, but it's not that long. And there's a lot of frustrations and pains that we as a country have gone through, and there's no whitewashing any of that. But for listeners who love the country, but feel frustrated by the politics, what is the one concrete act of civic courage that they can take right now?
Well, I would recommend that folks actually think about somebody, a specific person in your life whose courage has made a difference in your life. And go and thank them. Recognize that, And by the way, if you can thank them, if not, we on my book website, couragecansaveus.com, put in a little plug here. We are recognizing courage moments, and you can share that courage moment. And if you'd like for it to be shared publicly, you can flag that for me. I look at them myself. And it's one of the things that I would really like to see take off with this is recognizing the courage that has impacted your life through others. Oftentimes that's a parent, a mentor. That was another common theme of the incredible role of parents in developing the strength to be able to live a life that rises to the occasions and meets moments with courage, which in many of our lives is pretty rare. Like the really big moments are pretty rare. Your life is on the line, your reputation's on the line. But sometimes they are less rare and have a big impact. I just had a student that wrote to me and said that, listen, I'm a big guy. I work out at the gym. I'm physically large. And I just witnessed a kid that was half my size stand up to a bully. And I felt a little bit ashamed by that, but also pretty damn motivated by it. And so that's what I'd love for folks to do, is to think about recognizing courage. I also just want to give a shout out on America 250 because we've been a partner. Exeter, I know, has been a partner as well. This is a real moment for the country, and as divided as we are, we ought to celebrate what we have here because it is so incredible. You mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I've had the good fortune of being able to do volunteer work in Kenya for 25 years in some of the poorest areas where folks are living on less than $2 a day. And they are striving, just craving the types of opportunities that we have. No matter how tough it is in the United States, we are still a free country, and we still have the ability to chase our dreams. and realize our dreams. So I'm going to be out in next week. One of my favorite book event. Not that I, we have a lot of good ones, but this one's definitely my favorite. We're going to be at the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library for its grand opening, and that's in the heart, the right in the center of the Badlands in North Dakota. And it's an amazing facility, and we'll be recognizing President Teddy Roosevelt and his life, which was, of course, a life of courage and really looking back, a military veteran himself, and someone that I think is respected broadly across our tribal lines, which is a rarer thing these days. Why? Because of his independence of spirit and some of the hard choices that he made. Even if you disagree with the actual choice, the way in which he approached it, I think many people would find commendable.
Incredible. Well, Rye, we always ask, what's your favorite book that you've read recently? And obviously you just published a fantastic one that's available now to purchase wherever you buy books. I happen to listen to the audiobook, which you narrated and did a great job on, by the way. But beyond your book, what's your favorite book that you've got?
By the way, the audiobooks are, I listen to more books now than I read. I really enjoy it. And I'll give you two. The reading, of course, of an audiobook is like a full body exercise. So appreciate the shout out there. It took like 16 hours, and tried not to sound too cheesy when I channeled different voices and all. But I have two, and the first is this extraordinary book called The Hero Next Door. It's by Martha Raddatz, who herself has pursued really a life of service through writing and journalism, and it profiles 9/11 veterans who are not necessarily known by the public, but have come back after often tough deployments and found their second calling in ways outside of elected office. It's so well done, and I recommend it to all. And then the second that I'll just share was a book that was published about in 2014. I'm reading it because I'm writing a 5 best column for the Wall Street Journal. They asked me to write a column about everyday heroes. And the book is called Soldier Girl. And it is so well written. And what it is this reporter who's from Ireland embedded with a National Guard unit and followed a handful of women soldiers from like right before September 11th to 4 or 5 years into their service in the National Guard. And they're like gritty stories and just masterfully told. So those are the two that I'd recommend: Hero Next Door and Soldier Girl.
Awesome. Thanks, Rye. Where can people find you?
Check us out at couragecansaveus.com. And for those that are tuning in and are on the Hill, please, if it's of interest, join us at withhonor.org. All of the author proceeds from the book go to With Honor, which is a nonprofit that I now lead, and that works with this coalition of veterans that are focused on still, getting things done in issues that matter.
Incredible. Rye, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Kit. Take care.
That was Rye Barcott, Marine vet, co-founder of With Honor, and New York Times bestselling author of Courage Can Save Us. What I appreciate about Rye's message is that he brings courage back down to earth. It's not just something that happens on a battlefield or in a moment of crisis. It's something that shows up in the daily choices people make to serve something larger than themselves. And in today's politics, that may be exactly what the country needs most. Because the challenges we discussed, rebuilding the defense industrial base, strengthening biotech, expanding national service, addressing the national debt, and preparing and celebrating for America's 250th anniversary. These things cannot be solved by performance metrics. They require trust. They require durable coalitions. They require people willing to work across the lines of their differences when the easiest path is to retreat into division. Rye's point is that bipartisanship is not a weakness. It's a strength. And in many cases, it's the only way to build policy that lasts. And maybe that's the broader lesson for all of us. Civic courage does not always mean or require a grand gesture. Sometimes it starts with recognizing, someone whose courage changed our life. Sometimes it means reaching across a divide. Sometimes it means choosing service when cynicism would be easier. Rye's book, Courage Can Save Us. His author proceeds go to With Honor, and you can learn more about it at couragecansaveus.com and withhonor.org. Rye, thanks again for joining us. I'm Kit Conklin. Have a good rest of your day.